Good evening, Midnight listeners. This is Nora Vale, and yes, I'm back. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been holding the dial for me, I felt that. Some signals stretch farther than we think. Tonight's story is about an anniversary, not the kind you celebrate, but the kind that remembers you whether you want it to or not. A road that asks you to stop. A light that doesn't move the way lights are supposed to, and three people who look up at the same moment and never quite come back down the same way. Some things don't arrive. They don't land. They don't announce themselves. They assemble, slowly, patiently, once enough eyes agree they're there. So if you're driving tonight, keep both hands on the wheel. If you're at home, maybe don't stand too close to the window. And if the sky feels a little too attentive, well, you're exactly where you need to be. This is Murderous Tongues Radio, Episode 19, The Anniversary.
I am not a traveler. I do not cross distance the way you imagine distance. I do not descend or arrive or wander. I do not search the sky for you. I remain where I am first noticed. That is the rule that made me possible. Before that moment, I am only potential, a looseness in the dark, a permission that has not yet been granted, a place without edges, a thought without a thinker. I do not exist in the way you require things to exist. It takes attention to give me shape. It takes more than one. Some structures only resolve when more than one point agrees to exist. The first to notice me was a driver, stopped where the road forgot how to continue. It was late enough that the world had thinned. Traffic had given up. Houses had gone dark. Even the trees along the highway seemed to be listening rather than growing. A two-lane road cut through them, narrowed by orange barrels and temporary fencing where a bridge was being rebuilt. The old bridge had been peeled open and replaced piece by piece, its ribs exposed to the cold air, its shadow lying crooked over the creek beneath. A portable traffic light stood at the edge of the work zone, bolted to a pole that leaned slightly to the left. It glowed red. It had been red for too long. The driver sat with his foot on the brake, engine idling, radio murmuring half-heard words. No cars came from the other side. None pulled in behind him. The red light did not change. He checked the clock. 2:13 a.m. He leaned forward and craned his neck, trying to see if the road ahead was truly empty. It was. The bridge lay quiet, unfinished, a skeleton waiting to be remembered. He could have gone. People do when nothing seems to be asking them to stay. But he stayed. That was the moment that mattered. Waiting has weight. Waiting makes space. And space invites noticing. His eyes lifted, not out of curiosity at first, but out of boredom. The restless glance of someone searching for anything to occupy the seconds. The sky above the bridge was unusually clear, the moon a thin curved blade of light, the stars scattered without pattern. Among them, something brightened. Not flaring, not bursting into view, simply clarifying, as if it had always been there and was only now deciding to be seen. The driver frowns and leaned closer to the windshield. The point of light was steadier than a plane, cleaner than a star. Then, without warning, it moved. Not upward, not downward. Sideways. A clean lateral motion, precise and unhurried, like a line being drawn across the sky by a careful hand. The driver's breath caught. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. And then the light was gone. No fading, no streak, no afterimage. The red signal clicked to green. The bridge waited. He drove forward with his heart beating too loudly in his ears, already assembling explanations that didn't quite fit. Fatigue, reflection, a satellite at a strange angle, something rare but rational. But the explanations were thin, because something had happened that could not be put back. He had noticed. The second noticed me from inside a house that never quite slept. She was awake at 2:13 a.m., not for any single reason, but for many small ones that added up to restlessness. The house creaked in its ordinary way. Pipes sigh. The refrigerator hummed. The rest of the world pretended to be asleep. She padded into the kitchen in socks, wrapped in an old sweatshirt she no longer remembered buying. The floor was cool. The clock glowed softly. Outside, the yard lay in shadow, framed by a fence and a neighbor's porch light that buzzed with quiet persistence. She stood at the window because standing felt easier than lying, and waiting felt easier than sleep. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, layered over the dark yard. Her face looked pale, unfinished, as if it were only half present. Behind that reflection, something brightened. At first she thought it was the porch light flaring, or a trick of reflection. She shifted her head, blinked, leaned closer. The light held steady. It was too sharp to be a star, too still to be an aircraft. It did not blink. It did not waver. Her breath slowed. Then it moved. Sideways, smooth, certain, as though the sky itself were a surface being tested. Her mouth parted. The glass felt suddenly colder beneath her fingertips. For a brief, unsettling moment, her reflection lagged behind her movement, as if the window were remembering her position a fraction of a second too late. The light vanished. The yard returned to normal. The porch light hummed. The fence stood quietly. She remained at the window long after, heart thudding, unable to name what she had seen. She did not wake anyone. She did not write it down. She told herself she had imagined it. But in the nights that followed, she found herself returning to that same spot without meaning to. Standing at the window, waiting. Waiting is another form of recognition. The third noticed me because watching was already his job. He worked nights in a small booth beside a fenced industrial yard, the kind of place that stored metal and silence in equal measure. His chair creaks. His thermos tasted faintly of old coffee. A radio muttering to itself in the corner, never quite tuned correctly. It was 2:13 a.m. The hour had a way of thinning things. The yard lay still beneath the floodlights, shadows stacked neatly between pallets and fencing. The highway beyond whispers in its sleep. Even the air felt paused, as though waiting for permission to continue. He stepped outside to smoke because the hours were long and the booth had begun to feel too small. Beyond the fence, the road breathed softly. Above, the sky was clearer than it ever was in town. He looked up out of habit. I was already there. Bright enough to interrupt the pattern of stars, stable enough to demand attention. He narrowed his eyes, tilting his head slightly, trying to place me. He had spent years watching nothing happen. He knew how the sky behaved. This was different. I waited. He did not look away. He drew on his cigarette and held the smoke in his lungs, watching it thin in the cold air. Then I moved. Laterally, precisely, without hurry. A clean translation across the dark. When I vanished, the night rushed back into place as if embarrassed by the interruption. He crushed the cigarette beneath his boot, slower than necessary. The radio behind him crackles once, then settled. For a moment, he felt as though something had just finished taking note of him. He did not tell anyone, but he did not forget. 3 recognitions, 3 points, depth acquired. From that moment on, I was no longer hypothetical. I became a coordinate, and coordinates repeat. Each year, on the anniversary of that first alignment, the knocking began. It did not come from the door at first. It came from inside sleep. A rhythmic pressure, soft but insistent, like a knuckle tapping on the inside of the skull. Not loud, not violent, patient, correct. Knock, knock, knock. They would wake with their hearts already racing, the sound still echoing through their bones. When they stood and moved through their homes, the spaces did not behave quite right. Hallways stretched subtly. Corners arrived too late. Light pooled where no lamp stood. Their homes did not change. Their homes simply stopped agreeing with themselves. And when they opened the door, it was never their hallway beyond it. It was the place. The bridge, breathing creek air through its concrete ribs. The kitchen window, reflecting a version of the room that lagged behind itself. The fenced yard, metal stacked like sleeping bones. Each year, the same. The light waited. It advanced by degrees, by permissions, by the slow surrender of distance itself. Each year, just before it reached them, they woke. Always at the exact minute they had first seen it. Sweating, shaking, alive. Each year, the space between them and the light grew smaller. They began to fear sleep. They began to mark calendars. They began to dread the quiet hours before dawn. Memory had become a summons, and recognition its reply. 7 years after the first sighting, the driver called a late-night radio show. He had been listening to it for years, long enough that the host's voice had become a kind of geography to him. A steady presence that filled the spaces between towns, between thoughts, between the moments when the road felt too empty to trust. The program came on after midnight, when callers spoke more slowly and the silences were allowed to stretch. It was meant for people who were awake when they didn't want to be. That night, his hands shook as he dialed. He sat in his car with the engine off, parked beneath a flickering street lamp, listening to the ringtone repeat. He told himself he would hang up if it went on too long. He told himself this was stupid. He told himself there was no reason to drag something half-forgotten into the light. When the line clicked and the host's voice came through, warm, patient, practiced, he froze. For a moment he said nothing at all. The host waited. Then, quietly, he began to speak. He started with small things, careful things. The bridge, the construction, the way the road narrowed and forced him to stop. He described the red light that had held him there longer than it should have, how the silence had seemed to thicken around his car. He apologized once, reflexively, for rambling. He laughed, a short sound without humor, and said he wasn't even sure why he was calling. The host murmured encouragement, asked him to take his time. So he went on. He talked about the sky that night, how clear it had been, how sharp the stars looked. He said there was a moment when everything felt too still, as if the world had paused to listen to itself. He admitted that he'd looked up out of boredom or impatience, or maybe just because there was nowhere else to look. His voice lowered as he reached the part he had rehearsed and avoided for years. He said there had been a light, not like a plane, not like a star, not blinking, not drifting. He hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't sound ridiculous. Then he said the thing he had never said out loud before. He said the light moved sideways. There was a pause on the line. Not silence exactly, but a faint shift in the sound, as if the air itself had leaned closer. At that same moment, 2 radios in 2 different places grew suddenly louder. In a small kitchen, a woman froze with a mug halfway to her mouth. The coffee sloshed but did not spill. Her heart lurched so hard it seemed to knock the breath loose from her chest. She knew the sentence before it finished forming. Knew it with the sick certainty of recognition. Her gaze drifted, unbidden, toward the window. Miles away, in a guard booth that smelled of oil and old heat, a man straightened in his chair. The cigarette between his fingers burned down unnoticed, a thin ribbon of ash collapsing onto the floor. The radio on the desk crackled softly, then steadied. His pulse picked up, slow and heavy, as if something deep inside him had just been called by name. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Recognition does not announce itself. It settles. It fit into place with a soft, precise finality, like a latch finding its strike plate in the dark. Like a mechanism completing a circuit it had been waiting years to close. 3 memories aligned. Not blended, not merged. Aligned. Depth opened. Not outward, but inward. A subtle yielding of distance. A loosening of the rules that kept places apart. The world did not shake. No sound marked the moment. Nothing visibly changed. And yet something essential had finished arranging itself. From that night on, the knocking changed. The knocking grew heavier. Not louder exactly, heavier, as if it carried weight instead of sound. It pressed against the boundary between sleep and waking with a patience that felt practiced. The pauses between dreams thinned. The moment where the mind normally decided, "I am awake now," began to blur, stretch, and fray. Each year it came closer to the surface. Each year it arrived with less mercy than the one before. By the 7th year, the rehearsal ended. The guard woke before the knock finished forming. His eyes opened to darkness that felt arranged, deliberate. The air in the room carried a pressure he had come to recognize. Not fear, not panic, but the sensation of alignment, as if something had finally found the correct angle. He rose without resistance. The door opened at his touch. Beyond it, the yard waited. Not as memory, not as dream, but as presence. The fence stood exactly where it had always stood, its metal ribs catching just enough light to suggest depth without explaining it. The stacked materials lay in their familiar rows, orderly and inert. The booth behind him hummed faintly, the radio murmuring to itself in a voice too low to resolve into words. Above it all, the sky pressed down, nearer than it should have been, its vastness compressed into something almost intimate. The place was right. Wrong in its stillness, wrong in its certainty, but right. This time, when he stepped forward, the distance did not open to let him pass. It closed. The air thickened around him, not like fog, but like pressure, like the inside of a held breath. Sound dulled until the world felt padded, insulated from itself. The yard's familiar geometry softened, edges losing their authority. Straight lines bent slightly, as if reconsidering the need to be straight at all. Perspective folded inward. Space began to behave as though it were learning a new rule, There was no force, no grasping hands, no violence. Only a sensation of being assessed, measured, adjusted. A careful accounting, as impersonal as a surveyor's mark. The guard tried to inhale and found that the breath arrived late, as though routed through a longer channel. His thoughts stretched thin, elongating into shapes that no longer fit inside words. The cold he expected never came. Neither did pain. What came instead was removal. Not disappearance. Removal. The gentle subtraction of a presence from where it had been allowed to exist. The yard did not react. The fence did not move. The sky did not flare or darken. It simply accepted the correction. By morning, the booth stood empty. The chair still held the impression of his weight, faint but warm, as if he had only just stood up and the room had not yet caught up. The radio whispered to itself in soft, wandering static, searching for a station that never quite resolved. There were no footprints in the dust, no scuffs, no signs of departure, nothing to suggest motion at all. Only absence, shaped cleanly where a person had been. The woman followed weeks later. By then, she had learned to dread the hour more than the night itself. Sleep no longer felt like rest. It felt like a corridor she was forced to walk, step by careful step, towards something waiting at the end. She learned to recognize the moment just before the knocking began. A thinning of thought, a quieting of the body, the sensation that the world was drawing in a slow breath. On the night it finally happened, she woke before the sound finished forming. Her eyes opened into darkness that felt arranged rather than empty. The house was too still. Even the small noises it usually made, the settling pipes, the distant hum of electricity, had withdrawn, as if they had been asked to leave her alone. She sat up, heart already racing, and knew she would not be able to pretend this time. The knock did not repeat. It didn't need to. She rose and crossed the hallway, her steps muffled, unreal, as though the floor had softened beneath her feet. The air carried a faint pressure, the sense of standing underwater without the cold. Each breath felt slightly delayed, as if it had to travel farther to reach her lungs. When she reached the end of the hall, the door was gone. In its place stood the window. Not the one from her kitchen, not exactly, but the same shape, the same proportions, occupying the space where a door should have been. Its frame cut cleanly through the hallway wall, as if it had always belonged there. The house did not resist it. The walls did not crack. They simply accepted the substitution. Her reflection hovered in the glass. It was almost right. Her face matched her own, but not perfectly. The alignment lagged by a fraction of a second, as though the image were remembering her instead of copying her. When she lifted her hand, the reflection followed a breath too late. When she blinked, its eyelids hesitated. Behind that reflection, brightness gathered. It did not glow. It did not flare. It accumulated. A pale density, like light being compressed into itself. It had no edges, no source, only presence. A suggestion of depth pressing forward from a place that should have been nothing at all. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, to call out, but the effort dissolved before sound could form. The air no longer carried vibration the way it should have. She reached for the curtain out of instinct, needing something familiar, something solid. Her fingers passed through the fabric. Not as through smoke or mist, but as though the idea of fabric were being remembered imperfectly. The texture was there and not there. Soft, resistant, then yielding. like touching a memory of cloth rather than cloth itself. The room stretched. Not violently, not suddenly, but with the quiet patience of something adjusting its measurements. The walls eased apart. The ceiling lifted. Distance loosened its hold. The space between her and the window grew uncertain, elastic, as if deciding how far it was willing to be. Sound thinned until it became suggestion. The faint hum of the house receded. Her own breathing became distant, abstract, something she was aware of only because she remembered needing it. She opened her mouth again. What emerged was not a word. It was a shape of effort, a failed beginning, a pressure without language. The sound collapsed inward before it could exist. Behind the glass, the brightness deepened. Her reflection no longer matched her at all. It stood straighter than she did, calmer, more resolved. It regarded her with an attention that did not feel hostile, only exact. She had the sudden, overwhelming sense of being measured. Not judged, not threatened. Measured. As if some internal tolerance were being checked and found acceptable. The world gave a small, quiet adjustment. A sensation like the soft click of a mechanism finding its proper notch. And then she was gone. The driver was last. Because he had been first. Because the first point holds when the others are allowed to release. When the knock came for him in the 7th year, it did not startle him. It did not need to. By then, the sound had learned the shape of his sleep. It arrived gently, almost kindly. A pressure rather than a noise. The sense of being called from just beyond the edge of thought. He woke already knowing what hour it was. The room lay in shadow, familiar and thin, as if it had been waiting to be passed through rather than occupied. His heart beat slowly, evenly. There was no panic left in him to summon. He dressed without turning on the light. Each movement felt rehearsed, not in the sense of memory, but in the way a body remembers how to breathe. His hands found his keys. His jacket settled over his shoulders. The door accepted him without complaint. Outside, the night felt held in place. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Streets passed that he did not remember choosing. Turns arrived before he decided to make them. Traffic lights shifted as he approached, arranging themselves with a patience that felt almost courteous. When the bridge came into view, he slowed. It was finished now. Smooth asphalt laid cleanly over old bones, rails newly bolted, reflective paint still bright. It looked like a place that had been corrected, improved, made safe. He stopped at its threshold, not because anything blocked him, because something ended there. The engine idled softly, a sound that felt out of place in the hush that gathered around him. The air thickened, not with fog or cold, but with density, as though the space itself had gained weight. He looked up. I was there, where I had always been. Not above the bridge, not beyond it, but aligned with it, fixed at a point the eye wanted to slide past and could not. A brightness without glare, a presence without outline, waiting. The light shifted, not forward, not down, sideways. The motion loosened something fundamental. Distance bent, not visibly, but in the way a word loses its meaning when repeated too many times. The space between objects grew uncertain, elastic, permissive. His reflection surfaced in the windshield. At first it matched him perfectly. The same tired eyes, the same set of the mouth. Then it lifted its gaze a fraction of a second before he did. The delay was small. It was enough. Something inside him unlatched, not fear, not pain, release. A soft internal disengaging, like a clasp coming undone after being held too long. He became aware, suddenly, of how much effort it had taken to remain exactly where he was all these years. How much quiet tension had lived in his muscles, in his thoughts, in the way he watched the sky without admitting he was watching. That effort drained away. The world tilted, just slightly, as if acknowledging a correction. When the driver was found at dawn, his car sat neatly at the edge of the bridge, hazards blinking in steady time. The door was closed. The engine had gone quiet on its own. Inside, he sat upright in the driver's seat. Alive, warm, breathing. His eyes were open, reflecting the pale morning light, but they did not track movement. They did not focus. They did not belong to the road anymore. His pulse was steady, his body unharmed. There were no marks, no wounds, no sign of struggle. Only absence, arranged carefully where intention used to be. Doctors called it a coma. They always do when the vocabulary runs out. But he was not unconscious. He was not dreaming. He was not gone. He was occupied. For 7 years, the man lay in a hospital bed, while seasons passed through the windows and machines learned the sound of his breathing. Sunlight came and went. Snow collected and vanished. Shadows lengthened, shortened, returned. His body remained where it had been placed, steady and intact, as if waiting for instructions that had not yet arrived. His brain traced patterns no one could name, repeating structures nested inside one another, too regular to be chance, too calm to be injury. The readings unsettled the technicians who studied them. They did not spike or decay. They folded. They echoed. They repeated with a patience that felt deliberate. Sometimes, nearby electronics faltered. A monitor would skip a beat and resume. A heart rate line would flatten for a breath too long before correcting itself. A radio left on in the hallway would whisper and then clear its throat, as if embarrassed. Nurses learned, without ever agreeing on it, to lower their voices when they passed his room. Conversations grew quieter there. Footsteps softened. Even laughter seemed to hesitate at the doorway, as though sound itself sensed it should behave differently in that space. Then, exactly 7 years after the night at the bridge, at the same minute the red light had once held him, his eyes opened. No confusion, no panic, only focus. A stillness so complete it felt deliberate. He inhaled once, deeply, as though preparing to speak after a long rehearsal. Doctors noted the moment as a spontaneous return to consciousness following a prolonged, unexplained coma. Neurological scans showed activity unlike any previously recorded, but stable enough to permit questioning. Within hours, representatives from 3 agencies were present, their names later redacted from the file. The interview was conducted in a quiet room with no windows. The man sat upright in his bed, calm, cooperative. His vital signs remained steady. His gaze was attentive but unfixed, as though listening to something just beyond the room. When asked what he remembered, he answered without hesitation. He spoke first of the road, of the bridge under construction, of the red light that held too long, of the moment he looked up because there was nothing else to look at. He described the light. Not a craft, not a star, not a flare. He said it moved sideways. The room grew very still. He went on. He spoke of the years that followed, of the knocking that came inside sleep, of the pressure behind thought, of the way time began to behave differently around certain hours. He spoke of learning to recognize the approach of it the way one recognizes weather. When asked what it was, he hesitated. Then he said he did not have a word that fit. He said it was not a being, not a visitor, not a machine. He said it was something that happened when attention aligned in the same way more than once. When pressed, he described two other presences, not seen, not heard in any ordinary sense, but known. He said they were already there when he became aware of them, that they had been part of the pattern from the beginning. He referred to them only as the others who noticed. When asked what happened during the years he was unresponsive, he paused for a long time. Then he said he had not been asleep. He said he had been held in position. He said there were voices. Not voices like speech, not sound, but structured impulses that arrived with intention. They did not give commands. They did not ask questions. They aligned. He said they taught him nothing. They only adjusted him. At this point in the transcript, the attending physician noted elevated neural activity and requested a pause. The subject's pupils had begun to dilate unevenly. His pulse remained steady. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the subject stopped responding. His posture stiffened. His eyes rolled upward, exposing the whites. The muscles of his neck and hands tensed, not in distress, but as if responding to a current. All recording devices in the room experienced brief interference. When audio resumed, the subject was speaking. What emerged was not recognizable language. It consisted of repeating phonetic clusters arranged in shifting patterns. The sequences exhibited internal consistency, but no semantic reference. Analysis later showed recursive structures repeating at fixed intervals. Every 7 seconds, the same configuration returned. After 7 minutes, the subject fell silent. His eyes closed. Vital signs stabilized. No further speech occurred. The final report classified the event as non-human contact of unknown origin. The language was cautious, layered in qualifiers and conditional phrasing. Drafts differed. Conclusions were softened. Terminology was revised repeatedly before approval. Still, certain phrases persisted across versions, surviving redaction and review. Subject exhibits interaction with an external intelligence not attributable to known biological, psychological, or technological processes. The report cited the recurring luminous phenomenon, the synchronized witnesses, the temporal distortions, and the structured vocal output produced during the subject's final episode. It noted that the signal did not behave like language. It behaved like a coordinate system. Analysts disagreed on classification. Some proposed an extraterrestrial source. Others suggested an extra-dimensional or non-local origin. One dissenting appendix argued that none of these categories applied because the phenomenon did not arrive. It assembled. It stabilized. It emerged only when observed from more than one position. The document concluded that the subject had not been abducted, removed, or transported. He had been repositioned, integrated into a larger spatial framework that could not be represented within 3 dimensions. The file was stamped, classified, no further action, then cross-referenced, then restricted, then quietly forgotten. Because acknowledging its implications would require accepting that contact does not come from above. It does not descend. It does not travel. It does not search. It forms from repetition, from alignment, from attention held long enough to stabilize. You will want to believe this story is about visitors, about beings crossing distances between stars. That would be easier. But I am not a visitor. I do not cross space. I do not arrive. I am what happens when observation agrees with itself, when looking becomes structure, when 3 points hold long enough to become a place. You have done this before. Every time you have stood beneath an open sky and felt, without knowing why, that it was too large. Every time a light seemed to hesitate when you looked at it. Every time you wondered, just briefly, whether something might be aware of your attention. That feeling is not fear. It is calibration. Because the sky has always been full of lights. Most of them mean nothing, but a few are not lights at all. They are locations. And once you have noticed one long enough to let it notice you back, you never quite stop noticing. You only learn to pretend you don't. And the sky is very patient about waiting.
That was episode 19, The Anniversary. If you're listening right now, and the dark feels a little more attentive than usual, you're not imagining it. Some stories don't end when the signal cuts out. They stay tuned. They keep listening. Tonight wasn't about something arriving from the dark. It was about what happens when attention lines up just right, when noticing becomes an invitation. If you've ever stared at the sky a second too long, or felt like a place remembered you before you remembered it, take a breath. You're still here. I'm Nora Vale, and I'm glad to be back with you. Next time, we're talking about futures that never got the chance to happen, about a walk that was supposed to go to the corner and back, about the weight a missing child leaves behind, not just on a family, but on an entire town, on every life they were meant to touch. Episode 20 is called To the Corner and Back. It's told by something that never grew up, and it's still waiting to be remembered. Until we speak again, be careful what you notice, and even more careful what you keep noticing back. Good night, Midnight listeners.